Today is Friday, November 15th, 2024, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson. I'm here with Wallace G. Smith, fresh off the Council of Elders this week.
Yes.
How did it go?
It went really well. It's always nice, seeing guys from, all over the country and really, the world, and getting to see them again and talk with them. And it was actually a wonderful session. Very nice. A lot of people, most of them I think gone now on their way, and then some probably leaving a little later today. I know some definitely leaving later today.
Well, we've talked about the Council of Elders a couple times on the podcast, and so this is not new, but always a fun week. It's so nice to see those guys come in, and I don't know. It's just you just kind of have to be a part of it, I guess, to like fully understand how fun it is.
Yeah, it is. And it makes it sound like a party. It's not. It's a lot of work. But at the same time, I said all over the world. It's from Canada and Australasia, so it's kind of all over. Well, no, it's Peter Nathan as well. Mm-hmm. Mr. Nathan was there. So, it really is, mainly because it just feels like a great team, people on the same page, definitely different enough ideas to mix things up and to actually have, contribute different things, but at the same time committed to the same thing, committed to getting the work done and serving the brethren and opening up our Bibles. And Mr. Weston did a wonderful job coordinating everything and helping us to move along when it's time to move along, and keeping us on track so that we covered the most profitable ground we could. So it really was fantastic.
That's great. We're probably a week behind maybe where we wanted to be, but we wanted to talk about the election today.
We did. In fact, we often talk about the council a bit afterwards, but we said last time, we told you we'd talk about the election, and after a while, no one's even going to remember there was an election. No, that's not true. It's been one of the most dramatic elections in America, at least for a long time. So we said last week we're going to do it. So today we're going to do it. Let's talk about the election.
Let's talk about it.
Thank you, Jake and Julia, and welcome again to the Living Youth Podcast, where Mr. Robinson and I try our best, at least what we can approximate as our best on any given day, to help you, our teens and young adults in the church, learn to think biblically about what's going on in the news and our culture and current events. And so today, we will talk about one of the biggest things in American culture, at least, which really even in the U.S., outside of the U.S., you can tell some of the movements and shifts in politics when the presidency of the United States moves or is decided. It ends up impacting everybody. So the thing is, everyone out there has a take on the election, whether you're an American, whether you're not American, but we don't want to think about it like everybody else does. We want to think God's thoughts after him. We want to be able to think in a way that is biblically consistent and biblically informed. So that's our goal. That's our goal today. And Mr. Robinson, we did talk about it. I can't recall what your answer. Okay, actually, I think I do remember your answer. I know for my part, I stayed up. I almost felt compelled to stay up and watch it. It's that's elections recently. Until I know the resolution, I end up staying. So I was up till like 3:00 in the morning, I think.
Historically, I have done that, but I think after the one 4 years ago where it ran so late, and all of a sudden polls are in some states are saying, "Oh, we won't know tonight," and things like that. I don't know, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, okay, then I'm not going to wait up. This time, didn't even bother.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
I was wrong, by the way, but my sense was it was going to be another deep into, which I guess actually was kind of true, because I think you said that by the time you went to bed, you didn't have the results, right?
By the time I went to bed, they felt confident enough, finally. Like I said, it was 3:30 in the morning. Our time, our close here on the East Coast of the United States, that Mr. Trump made a speech. Miss Harris had already sent someone out to tell supporters to go home. She was
always
not going to be giving them. Always a bad sign. And anyway, so it was firm enough that I fully expected to wake up and it had been decided. But and I will say at least one of the media groups had projected a full winner by then, but I would think they were hesitant. Let me say, if this had been an earlier year, like a much earlier year, before, certainly before lawfare, in terms of using legal maneuverings to try to shape the outcome, was more standard, which regrettably is today. I think it actually would have been called a lot earlier, because even on their own, I end up watching CBS a lot because I just watched YouTube, and I was looking to see who has a live feed on YouTube. And a lot of their projectors would say, well, here is where it currently is with all the reporting counties of this such and such particular state. Here's what so-and-so needs to take this, but here's where our projections, this is what we expect so-and-so to land tonight. And I think if you go back enough elections, that would have been enough for them to go, oh, wow, this is not going to happen for so-and-so. But based on last time's results and the poll, they're recognizing our polls are just kind of crazy these days. Nate Cohn, I like him a lot. People will differ on that, but he definitely leans left, but I still find him to try someone who seems to be someone who's trying to deal honestly in the facts. And he was one, I thought his New York Times article basically says, look, we don't really know what's going to happen. It seems like it's really close, but he'd say, if so-and-so wins, here's how everyone's going to say, oh, we should have known that's the way it would turn out. But if the other person wins, here's how they're going to say, oh, we should have known that's the way it would have turned out. So he said this really is sort of up for grabs. So I did find it, plus I got to admit, I like the graphs, the stats. I like seeing those kind of analyses. I think it's fascinating. And we might have mentioned this a little bit in the last podcast when we just referred to the election in the United States. But just as someone who's in front of the camera and someone who, right now we're doing something it's not live, but it's not scripted. I am fascinated by the professional environment to see all of these people that, unlike a lot of prepared news programs, they literally don't know what's going to happen moment to moment, and they're calling things on the fly and trying to seem professional and prepared. So even for that, it was actually, I really enjoyed staying up to watch it.
Yeah, I thought you made a good point about that, because it is difficult to fill time when you need to talk. I remember somebody telling me one time, they, just for fun, they were making something in their kitchen, and they tried to pretend like they were doing a cooking show. And talk. And it's a real art to talking the whole time while you're making something.
It is. And guys like me, I can make up words, right? But it's got to be valuable, because especially if it's television, if it's not valuable to the viewer, they're going to switch to see what NBC is saying. Yeah. They're going to switch to somebody else. And I thought they did a great, better than say, during the commercial breaks, because it's YouTube. It's, even though it's TV, it's on it's YouTube. It's still television, so they had to put some commercials in for the time. So I would check out some of the others here and there, and found it wasn't long before they had some segments like, oh, I don't want to keep watching this. I want to get back. So props to CBS. I thought they did a pretty decent job. Okay, we didn't come to talk about all of that. We're already 7 minutes in or so. We wanted to just, again, talk about the election, but we want to have our biblical minds going, because I will say, I heard here within our own halls at headquarters, my door was closed, as I'm often trying to seal out the world and just focus on the things I want to get done. But I did hear a 30-something and a 20-something. I won't say who they were, actually still talking about the election. They're wrapping something up and say, and so even now people are processing. And so how do we process it biblically? Well, the first thing I would want to say that it's not wrong to notice this has been a weird year. That I think when you have a weird year, it's worth, I'd say, assuming to a certain extent that God seems to be on the move, that things are kind of really strange. Here you had a candidate, not even someone elected, a candidate that had at least 2 very public assassination attempts. One guy was gearing up. The earlier guy actually took some shots. And that's not normal, right? That changes the dynamic of the election. I remember the Telegraph, the UK paper, I might refer to it later. They were essentially saying after the first assassination attempt on Mr. Trump, and by the way, we're going to do our best to say Mr. and Ms. and Mrs. Mr. Trump, Ms. Harris. Please forgive us if we don't. We're not trying to be disrespectful. We actually want to uphold that culture, but it's easy to forget. But anyway, they were already calling us, wow, this kind of election's over now, right? You had the debate performance, that you had this. They're saying, really, isn't this kind of a foregone conclusion? That really does change things up. And then you had the other candidate dropping out and being replaced by what was the vice presidential candidate.
And there was even controversy around that.
Oh, a lot of controversy. And yet, there may have been controversy, but if it was to please their base, certainly did, because I think the rest of their base saw this is a losing thing. And these days, it's all about the winning. And there was you wonder what kind of machinations went in, what kind of deals, because it is politics. Deals are cut. We're not just saying that that's only one-sided, but this was an extremely strange year, and there's nothing wrong with noticing. We have to be careful about assuming too much with a stranger. Like I said, I see a lot of real strangeness, and I wonder if what's God doing, what's going on. But at the same time, it's easy to presume why it's strange or what God might be accomplishing, and we'll actually get to a little bit of that here in a bit. But it's the first thing I want to say, especially for we have many viewers, listeners, not in America. And Mr. Robinson, would you agree that they shouldn't have watched this one and think, well, that's just the way politics is in America? This was very strange.
No, it was very strange, because I was trying to remember as we were doing our show prep how old I was when I actually started paying attention, and I would have been 13. The 1984 election, it was Reagan and Bush for a second term, and by then CNN had come out, and for the first time ever, you kind of had a round-the-clock news cycle thing.
Right.
So I've always paid attention to politics on some level, and always, like you said, I used to always stay up to watch who won the presidential election. But there were kind of rules around how it was all done. There was a certain expectation of how things would be done, and at the end of the day, one side won or the other, and it wasn't that controversial until the Bush one with the
Mr. Bush and Mr. Gore
Gore. But now it's like the guardrails are gone, and there's nothing, and we're swerving all over the road, and it's just like you said, the fact that President Trump was nearly assassinated twice, and yet you still don't hear it on the news very often is kind of curious to me. But
it still seems like it's a major thing that would still make for discussion.
And I think one of the reasons it's still on everybody's mind is because after it was pretty clear that he had won the election, Mr. Trump had won the election, that he starts making these cabinet appointments right away, and they're already super controversial. So I mean, it's going to be exciting for the foreseeable future.
Well, sure, and you'd have to think if there's an air about even the potential of his presidency to motivate at least 2 attempts on his life, it's not like that stops, right? People say, "Oh, well, he's president now, so we'll just stop trying to be terrible."
Right.
Okay, so that's one thing, and we'll come back to a little bit of that here in just a bit. I have an egg analogy. Help me remember, Mr. Robinson. I think it's valuable. We'll find out if it is about egg. No, well, we'll see. We'll see. Okay, but the second point I want to make, and I actually did want to look up this article I used to have. Maybe I can find it. Well, you know what?
Should I fill the air?
I might have sent it to you. That's right. Well, I'll say that there are a number of religious individuals. Like Mr. Trump, it's so interesting. He would not normally have garnered so much, say, support of evangelicals and, say, certain kinds of Christians, quote unquote, except for I think a great sense of the desperation in the country, the direction it's going. And yet you do see a lot of support, to the point that there were several. I'd like to say this fellow, Jonathan Cohn. I'm not sure if he did or not, but that were out there, multiple individuals claiming that, oh no, this is prophecy being fulfilled. That he is going, looking at a lot of different things. One of it was his support, that he seems like he's going to be more supportive of Israel, that he's going to come in and clean house. And so you see, that's an element that you don't normally see in the elections, and yet there were a lot of preachers out there saying that. Yeah,
I have a news site that I go to from time to time that's kind of like an independent. I use the term journalist loosely, independent journalist or citizen journalist. It's kind of an aggregator, so you can just find lots of them, and I poke around on them sometimes because it's interesting to see what's out there in the meta. And it's amazing how many kind of independent media types who have a kind of a conservative Christian lean to them, or sometimes not even lean, just clearly that's who they are, and they're very open about it. I think nearly all of them, near as I can tell, all thought that Trump's he didn't dodge the bullet, but the bullet came so close to hitting him and if his head was turned ever just a few degrees another way, it would have been a fatal shot. That attributed it to God and believed it was a true miracle, and then it kind of took on a bit of a life of its own. I feel like that that God had protected and preserved Trump because he, has big plans for him.
Oh yeah, and maybe we did talk about that because we did. If you go back, we do have a podcast, Meditations on an Almost Assassination. I can't remember the number, but go take a look at that. Because my question for people is, well, what if we discover that? Because honestly, the Secret Service, I've heard tales that actually they stop a whole lot more things we never talk about.
Yes.
One thing you don't do is publicize things because that just inspires more people to do it. Well, if we discovered there was a near miss and maybe, say, a Mr. Biden or someone else, would we also, oh, God really protected him? Or would we color how we think about that? Like, oh, would we say, oh, the devil protected him? It's like, well, now we're being picky, now we're being choosy. I did find the article, by the way.
I think because of the second attempt that was stopped, that just added
it did.
to the lore,
definitely.
if you will.
And I want to say I'm not dismissing that. Mm-hmm. Clearly, God does shape things. Now, the thing is, we can presume why he's doing it, but he clearly does. And I did find the article. It's from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, and it's an article titled "Why Trump is Being Compared to the Obscure Biblical King Jehu on the Christian Right." And they write, according to the Bible, Jehu orders the killing of Jezebel as he takes over the kingdom of Israel and eradicates the idol worshippers who had led the people away from God. He says, well, Donald Trump's fans and critics alike have compared him to some of history's most famous ruler, Cyrus the Great, Adolf Hitler, King David, and more. But on the eve of the election, a celebrity pastor named Jonathan Cahn wants his evangelical followers to think of the Republican candidate as a present-day manifestation of a far more obscure leader, the biblical king Jehu, who vanquished the morally corrupt house of Ahab to become the 10th ruler of the kingdom of Israel. And then it actually quotes this fellow. He writes, President Trump, you were born into the world to be a trumpet of God, a vessel of the Lord in the hands of God. God called you to walk according to the template. He called you according to the template of Jehu, the warrior king. It says Khan told hundreds of Christian leaders who gathered last week for the National Faith Summit outside Atlanta. He also shared a clip of his prophecy about Trump on his YouTube channel, which has more than 1 million followers. And he's not alone. YouTube was featuring this other guy. A lot of podcasters were having him on his prophecy predicted the assassination attempt. Well, okay, that's how far is that really? We have to be careful about stuff like that because, well, actually, I will say this. Some of these guys, if you actually look at their history, they actually said the opposite. If you go back far enough, they said that in God's going to raise Trump to office again. He's going to be president in 2020. And of course he didn't. He wasn't the president in 2020. In fact, there was a funny Babylon Bee article that suggested, it said, in brilliant move, Democrat, this is fake news. For those who don't look at the Babylon Bee, it's a satirical website. They said, in brilliant move, Democrats agree, Donald Trump, guess what? He did win in 2020, which means he can't be elected for a third term. Yeah, I thought that actually would be pretty funny. But there is actually a passage in the Bible that tells us what to do when someone who claims to be a prophet actually says, God says this is going to happen, you know it's going to happen, and then it actually doesn't happen. And it specifically concerns those who claim to be prophets. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 21, 22, God tells Israel, and if you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? And he says, when a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. Well, how many of these guys are also admitting, well, I was kind of saying this in 2020 as well, and then it didn't happen? Or do they go back and then reverse engineer a reason? Here's why, here's why that. Well, I'm sorry, you're either a prophet or you're not.
Right.
You fess up, and just say, honestly, I'm not actually a prophet. God doesn't reveal special things to me. But I do look in the Bible, and I just really thought this is what the Bible was going to say, right? Well, then just own up, and then make sure if you've got a business card that has the word prophet on it, scratch through that. So it's kind of like
it's kind of a red flag if you have a business card that says prophet.
I would say so, given that all the evidence shows there's not actually any prophets working today. If a lot of these people are kind of like stock market things. There used to be a scam where you would kind of publicize certain where the stock's going to go here and there. And then over time, you're going to be right, say 50% of the time. So when you put your final materials together, you can literally point to publications or something where you said, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. It's like, look at the track record of this guy. Well, that's because he's highlighting his successes. A lot of this fellow, Jonathan Cahn, is a really good example. I actually do bring up things in the TWPs because a lot of our people come to TWPs and they're just watching all sorts of prophetic guys. They could listen to that fellow, another guy named John Hagee. They're listening to that. And I say, hey, look, I'm not here to knock those guys. I don't know them personally, right? I tend to mention how they could be very nice people. Personally, again, I don't know. But one, how are they giving you prophecies? And then two, what is their track record? Go back and look. And a lot of them, they're pointing at cycles of blood moons, all these things. God says, don't be dismayed at the signs of heaven. They're doing a lot of things that feel like, oh, that's amazing. But then what happens? Their prophecies don't come true. And they don't keep publishing the book that failed. They just publish a new book where now they kind of twist things around. So for our young people, we want to make sure you don't fall into those kind of traps. We care about the Bible. And if someone says, oh, I think the Bible predicted Mr. Trump's assassination. Don't fall for that kind of stuff, right? Stick with the fundamentals. Stick with the truth. Where is God actually working? What is God's government? Who's preaching most of the truth? Stick with those things. So be in mind, there's going to be false prophets that use this kind of stuff for advertising. I'm sure, honestly, if I were Mr. Khan, I'm making hay with that. And I think someone did say, because I don't actually go out to his channel, but you are seeing a lot more political kind of stuff.
Yes.
If someone is focusing that much on politics, honestly, they've lost the message. You know what Jesus Christ didn't focus on for 3.5 years is he didn't focus on the politics of his day, and the politics of his day were even more rambunctious than ours.
I think this is an important point because you even gave a sermon on this that behold the white horse, because amazing things happening in religious deception is only going to grow in the near future. So
yeah, thanks.
So for example, let's go through this thought exercise. Let's say a notable person from the mainstream Christian community, the American, what do we call, we don't call it Orthodox.
Evangelical?
The evangelical community, okay. Makes a prediction, comes true, something about Trump maybe, let's say. And then maybe he even makes a second one, and that also seems to have come true. And it gets a lot of attention, and people are really talking about it. And it might be tempting to think, well, I don't know, man. This guy's he's been getting these things right. But what does the Bible tell us to do to vet those people? He tells us, well, what do they say next? What is the call to action? Well, what the call to action with an evangelical Christian will be is to return to evangelical Christianity. What is evangelical Christianity? Well, guess what? They think the law's been done away with and you don't have to keep it. They think that there's nothing wrong with keeping Christmas and the holidays. They don't. It's not a call to keep the Sabbath or keep the holy days. And you know what? God still cares about those things, and those things matter. And so if there's a big resurgence in quote unquote Christianity, it's going to be a resurgence in false Christianity.
Right.
And that's where these prophets that appear to have made accurate calls are inspiring you to go towards.
Yeah. We'll go ahead and read the scripture that Mr. Robinson's referring to in Isaiah chapter 8, speaking to those who seem to get your attention, right? See, it says Isaiah 8 and verse 20, to the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it's because there's no light in them. And that tends to be what I do when people bring at TWPs these individuals up. I'd say, well, hey, are they teaching you the commandments? Are they telling you to actually, worship God on the Sabbath? One of them, it was interesting, said, oh, you've really got to listen to Rabbi so-and-so. Oh, he's just amazing. And as went on and said, oh, he's saying the same things as you guys. He really said, well, it's interesting. Is he really? And then she said, oh, yeah. And, you can get his stuff, and I said, oh, is of a store? Yeah, you can buy any of his stuff. They have a store. And I said, oh, well, so I guess Christ's command not to sell, to the truth and actually to give it away for free is, I guess he's not interested in keeping that command. She's like, oh, and then she started kind of hemming and hawing. Well, I don't know if it's him. Maybe it's other people. And I said, look, we are different. I hope you'll take a look and pay attention. So what you just said is going to actually allow us to, it's going to actually help us move to the next point. But I did want to highlight that yes, don't lose sight of the basics. Don't let someone impress you with some kind of claim focus on the basics. Go back to listen to Why the Living Church of God, for instance. Go listen to that podcast. However, this kind of moves us in a different direction because we can all do this. And this is, again, I'm not trying to point fingers, necessarily. What's the old thing? People say, you point a finger at someone, there's 4 more pointing back at you. I said, well, yeah, if your thumb is reversed, right? There's only 3 more pointing back at you.
I appreciate you bringing that point out because that also has bothered me.
Is it really?
Yes.
Okay. It's like, well, no, my thumb I'm pointing at you. My 3 fingers are pointing at me and my thumb's pointing at Bob. Yeah. So anyway,
there's all kinds of accusations.
That's right. So thinking of what we can do. And I've done this, like, okay, what might God be doing, right? So God has got Trump in place now, Mr. Trump. What is it he's going to be doing? And let me just say, we have no idea. Now, people will confidently say, here is exactly what God is doing. And I would say, yeah, that's easy to say.
Well, so I think what a great point. Of course, you only make great points.
So, thank you, Mr. Robinson. That's why we work together.
So there are at least 3 things at a minimum, the direction in which a Trump presidency can go. No, 4. Okay.
They're going to multiply. Okay.
Right. 1. So a lot of people have a lot of hopes that Mr. Trump is going to come in and kind of clean house and clean up corruption and get the United States, back on track and back to being a great representative republic and all these kinds of things. So that's one way. Another way that he could go is that he actually makes no progress, that there's such an entrenched group of people, and you only have 4 years, and the last 2 years you're a lame duck, right?
Right.
So how much can he actually get done? And so nothing happens. And so that's another direction he could go. He could be assassinated again. That's yet another.
Regrettably, and if the NSA is listening or something, we're not recommending this, but we're just talking about the reality. Just want to make sure
the
people
NSA is always listening. And so for any of us to try to make a prediction about why, so that this kind of goes back to the heart of it. Let's say that because God chooses who the leaders are going to be, and for the best overall lesson for all of us, the American people in the world watching, and those of us even in the church, is, well, since God chooses who the leaders are going to be, we're only guessing as what the purpose is or what lesson it is that we're going to learn. Maybe there is a temporary respite from the direction of the country and things do improve, but maybe it's to show that the nation is unsalvageable. That even if when we get the leader we want, that makes, and I know not everybody wanted Trump. So
right, exactly.
I'm just
the leader that half the people.
Yeah, that a lot of people think is going to really fix things, and what we really find out is, okay, here was yet another reforming leader who came in, and guess what? Can't reform you because your nation is too corrupted. Does Isaiah describe it as from the head to the foot, rottenness and every kind of putrefying sore. Describing
is that Isaiah 2, but around there, yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree. What if it is? Hey, guess what? I'll give you, kind of like with Saul. Israel wanted a king, like the kings around them, and he gave them Saul. And man, Saul is tall. He just looks promising, and yet wasn't in the end what the country really, really needed. Same thing
Which
here.
was the point, right?
Exactly.
The lesson for them to learn.
This, here's like, hey, look what your democracy delivered, aren't you? For those who debate Democratic Republic, I do know the difference, but regardless, read the article. So read the article. So that said, hey, good, look, you did it, man. You've got virtually all the control. You don't have more than 60, so I guess it's not filibuster proof. But not to mention, Mr. Trump seems to be appointing people out of the House that they won, which is like what's gonna happen to your majority. But ignoring all that, here's the thing. The solutions they're going to enact are not what God is fundamentally looking for in America. And I think that's interesting, because talking about not being able to predict, I think I've made the point on the podcast before that when Mr. Bill Clinton won re-election way back in the 90s, I think, when he won re-election, I remember at first being disappointed. I felt he was a person of low character. Let's just say the bar has lowered since Mr. Clinton's presidency.
Wow.
Publicly lowered. I'm not saying that definitely one's a better person than the other, this or that, but in terms of what the people will put up with, it's definitely changed. But still, I remember personally being disappointed. I felt he was, I was concerned about his character, and thought, well, I guess God's going to just make things worse,
right,
now.
Right.
And yet, part of what came out of that, well, there was some stability over that period to a certain extent, but also God's people in many places actually benefited because Mr. Clinton's commitment to try to pander to the homosexual community resulted in certain workplace regulations changing for purposes of tolerance, et cetera, which have only grown to get terrible, but honestly helped me as a Sabbath holy day keeping Christian. My boss literally came to me with a pamphlet based on those things and said, hey, if there's ever any trouble that's caused, if someone in HR or something is upset about your holy day observances, just so you know, this is our policy. And you should be able to do those things. The onus is on. She was a great manager. I really appreciate her, and for many reasons. But no, who knows if God didn't actually allow that person? So it's sort of the same thing here. What if it's like, oh, we've given you what you want, and then things don't go? And are we expecting Mr. Trump to actually press Sabbath keeping and holy days and say, well, no, but he is going to make it more pro-God, right? He's putting pro-God people here and there. Well, I would say your definition of pro-God might need a little bit of work, but also what does that actually mean? Because we know the future, the horseman that's coming, the first horseman is not quote unquote anti-God. It's not some atheist. It's not going to be Richard Dawkins riding a white horse. It's going to be a false Christianity. And the Christianities that are really involved with Mr. Trump, are they really all, did we just send someone from the Church of God to work? No, that's not. The people that are doing that, they have designs, they have plans. I know a lot of Catholics that are excited about the potential future. So yeah, the idea of trying to predict where things are going to go, it goes back to what I think Dr. Meredith said in Mr. Trump's first term. I mean, when Mr. Trump, we were all watching the inaugural together, and Dr. Meredith said, well, God could be giving us more time for the work, more religious freedom, hopefully, or he could be trying to get World War III a little bit faster by putting a wild card in. And yeah, I would say don't get married to your personal predictions.
Yes, very good rule of thumb.
Very good rule of thumb for life.
Yes,
for life. Okay, what's the fourth point? This is more a self-reflection. And Mr. Robinson and I, we're self-reflectors. Do you think you're a self-reflector, Mr. Robinson?
At times, yes.
I actually, you know what? I will give a personal attestation to Mr. Robinson. I've actually really appreciated his level of self-awareness. We've known each other for a good long time now. And I say, Mr. Robinson, I'll just say a quick compliment. I think you've been an example to me sometimes when I've seen you reflect and discover things and a level of self-analysis that's moved me to try to examine myself a little better. So you're welcome.
Well, then let me lead here with your
okay, great.
So let's say somebody I was less happy about won the presidency. What's my reaction going to be?
Which could be the case for some of our listeners, right?
And I know enough of myself, especially from the past, that, well, in fact, I'll just make an admission. There was another president that was elected in the last 30 years, will be generic, that I was super not happy about winning, and I did not have a good attitude about it. And then I remember thinking later, that God commends us to pray for all of our leaders, whether we like them or not, and accept them in the office and the authority that they have. It's not our job to try to thwart them or work against them.
So that brings up that's exactly right. So that actually brings up our point is, were you prepared? This is a self-examination point, you young people out there and anyone else listening who's not young. Were you prepared for no matter who won? Were you prepared to follow the Bible's instructions to honor the king? And you might think, it's not a king. Okay, hush about that. Don't be silly. Look at the principles. The Bible talks about submitting to the governing authorities. Of course, don't sin. We can't sin, but rarely they're coming up and saying, hey, sin or I'm going to throw you in jail.
No, you're right. So for example, we're supposed to serve in the military. We're supposed to sit on juries, and we don't do that because we believe that.
We say we're supposed to, meaning the government expects us to.
Expects us to. So in those areas, but we have good legal standing on how we handle it. But that's an example of where it would be violating our biblical conscience, and we don't do those things.
You know what? My son literally went through this week. One of the boys. Yeah.
Jury's so tough.
It was his name rhymes with Schmenjamin. And he got a jury duty. He did everything we told them to do. We recommend. in terms of getting the church packet together, trying to send it. But a lot of people outside the U.S. might not realize this, that for all of our religious freedoms in the U.S., this is not legal advice, by the way. I am not a lawyer. But generally, a lot of courts, they don't actually want to make official that you can get out of jury duty for religious reasons. Even though there is a court case, there's a Supreme Court case where actually someone went to jail for they didn't want to serve on a jury. And believe it or not, it's a Church of God member. It is one of us back in the Worldwide Church of God. And so there's precedent, but they still, and part of it, I wonder if it's because they feel like the gates would open loose and everybody's going to say they don't want to serve on a jury for their religion, and be fake. But regardless, so he got the summons. And so here's the thing. We don't serve on juries. That could be a whole nother podcast. Pat, we have talked about that. Yeah. So go listen to that podcast about serving on juries. But anyway, regardless, we're an ambassador. We're not to judge as the world judges. All the reasons for that. But it's not to actually show up at the court. That's not breaking God's law, right? To actually yield to the court and show up and have your papers with you to give to somebody.
Just go before the judge and explain it.
Which I literally had to do standing in front of the judge with the two attorneys on either side.
Been there.
So my son did. He went. He was prepared to explain what he needed to explain. Ended up being there for 2 days. 2 days.
I've never had it that bad. I've had to go before the judge a couple of times, which is pretty intimidating, but I never had to stay for any length of time.
Oh, yeah. And it was like, I haven't actually had to talk face to face with him. It's all through text, but it was like jury selection. Like he's sitting in there. And it's not, because there's times I've gone and I've been in the giant waiting pool and then nothing came of it. And but he's literally in the pool. Now, he did say he wasn't as concerned, because one of the first questions the prosecutors asked, it might have been the very first question, is there anyone here who, because of their religious convictions, would not be able to be involved in a conviction of someone? And so I think he was immediately able to, and I think he recognized from that point on they're probably not going to want him, but still 2 days.
Sit there, huh?
2 days had to go through all that. But okay, so that's very real. But the thing is, yes, he didn't serve on a jury, but in all the other things, he completely submitted. They told him to show up, and even though it was clear from the beginning he wouldn't be on, whether they just want to pester him, they just want to, we're still going to make you sit there, son. He did. So we do submit. So keeping that in mind, the Bible does say, in fact, specifically Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 17, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Paul makes similar comments, but people say, yeah, but they don't understand. If so-and-so is the president or so-and-so is my senator, that's just going to, this is a person of low morals. This is a person who wants to destroy the country. This is a person who actually want to put people like me in jail. What government do you think actually murdered Peter? What government beheaded Paul, as we understand? What government crucified Peter? The very government. They're telling you honor the authorities. Yeah. We don't have excuses to be cantankerous, disrespectful people. We tell the truth. We call out sin, but we don't have an excuse. So let's say, no matter how let's say were you ready? That's what I'm asking. No matter who was elected, to pray for that person, to pray for wisdom on their part, to give us peace.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm talking.
No, please.
Mr. Ames made that point all the time. He would ask us from the pulpit from time to time, or even privately. Well, Mr. Robinson, did you pray for the governor of North Carolina? Do you know who the governor of North Carolina is? And it was but it was such a good exercise for him to do. Friend of the podcast, Phil Senna. This is back when we all lived in Austin, so this means that was at least almost 15 years ago.
Oh wow.
And he told me about this. I don't know if I was manifesting a bad attitude towards a leader or we just had a discussion about it. And he said, when I was going through Ambassador College, I think that's the time period, I thought, God certainly doesn't expect us to be like really obedient to like mean leaders or mean managers and things like that. And he said, so I did it in a Bible study, and he says, it says nothing of the sort. In fact, it's the opposite. You're expected to obey those in authority over you, whether they're good or they're bad. And I think you find that true servants of God, when you study through the Bible, they do.
Yeah.
I think of the example of, when King Ahab was on the throne, and I need to get the prophet's name, or the guy's name down, but he was the one that hid the prophets in the caves. He still served Ahab, even though he was an evil, evil king. but at the same time, he also preserved some of the life of the prophets. And I thought that was such a good example of who of us in his situation wouldn't justify, I don't have to do what that evil King Ahab says.
Right.
Yet in the ways that he could, he did what the king said. It's not a lot of verses dedicated to it, but if you read it, it's clear that he was doing what Ahab said.
It's a little different than that, but I'm so grateful for that example. It kind of makes me think of David's friend Jonathan, son of Saul. He clearly loved his father, served his father. His father essentially said, "Give up David, give him to me," and he didn't do that. He wasn't gonna sin against God, right? But at the same time, he was loyal to his father, the king, in that sense, to his death, right? I mean, he was able to obey God and recognize, no, there's a time when I've got to do something different. But he didn't use it as an excuse to throw his father under the bus. And that's always going to be the way it is in this world. If you have King Darius and Daniel, it's not like Darius finally has Daniel pulled out of the lion's den. He says, "You dirty rat, king, you should have known better than all." But it's the first thing he says, "O king, live forever," right? There's that kind of honor. So this is an opportunity for us to examine ourselves, whether we're happy about how it went or whether we're sad about how it went. Do we have what the attitude God wants us to have toward our leaders in terms of respect, in terms of honoring them? Frankly, the way I tend to think about it, if God has to remind us, honor the king, submit to why is he doing that? Because he's not telling us because the kings that are easy to honor,
Mm-hmm.
God doesn't have to command us to do that. He's saying it because there's so many that it is hard to honor, and those are the ones.
As my mother-in-law said to me many, many years ago, she said, "Well, it's not a really good trial unless it's unfair." And she meant she meant some of the most difficult trials you'll ever have are going to be ones where you think, well, that wasn't fair, that wasn't right, how I was treated, or these other events that happened. Nope, God learns a lot about your character when you feel like you've been wronged.
Man, that's a great point. Okay, the next one.
It was Obadiah, by the way.
It was Obadiah.
Okay, this is
Thank you, Mr. Robinson.
We should do this more often. We'll challenge our listeners to read 1 Kings 18 and read the story. It's not long, but it's in there because it's quite clear. Obadiah, I forgot that the section actually says now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, so it's clear that he was, but he did his best to serve Ahab, even though he was an evil king.
Well, that's awesome. So we're giving homework, which is awesome. I'm not sure if we've done that officially before. What's the passage again you wanted to read?
1 Kings 18.
1 Kings 18. All right, 1 Kings 18. Y'all get after it. It's one chapter.
Yep.
Come on.
And it's story flow. It's really I think it's fun to read.
Really?
Yeah.
It's got the Mr. Robinson stamp of approval. Okay, very nice. The next point. And we're almost done here. This is the second to last point. But this kind of thing is interesting. And part of it's just being, I can't say I'm really a news guy, but I am an analysis guy, and I like hearing people's takes. When something like this happens, everybody's got a different take. And I like reading the takes. I think it's fascinating. I like looking at the polls and the statistics, what they feel they've learned. But for what I've seen so far, most of the takes are really incomplete. And it's not like there's a one factor reason. At least personally, I don't think. So many factors seem to have played a role in this. The ultimate factor is that God wanted things to go in a certain direction. That's something we always have to keep in mind. He wanted to go in a certain direction in 2020. He wanted to go in a certain direction in 2016. Well, among the things people have said, you had some talk about, well, clearly the economy drove this. Well, I think to a certain extent, of course it did. People are frustrated. It's hard to stay being president when most of your people. There was a famous statement by Mr. Bill Clinton when he was running against George H.W. Bush. And Mr. George H.W. Bush was Ronald Reagan's vice president. He'd been president himself for 4 years, and he was running against Mr. Bill Clinton. And Mr. Bill Clinton had a statement, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful. This was their statement. He said, "It's the economy, stupid." Mm-hmm. They boiled it down to that. It was a political masterstroke in simplicity. It tapped into people's frustrations while at the same time putting down their opponent, and it is a big deal.
Yeah, and he's right in that sense. With human reasoning, he's correct. Because here's the thing I learned in the Clinton administration, and it's unfortunate that there are specific people tied to specific political parties because it sounds political. I like to think my takeaway from some of this was not so much political.
Mm-hmm.
So Bill Clinton did do some inappropriate things in the White House. I think that's fairly well established. And it seems like the United States, in general, understood this, and some other things about his character that weren't the best. But the economy was so good. It was the first .com bubble. The internet had come out, really drove things forward. Everybody was making money hand over fist, and it felt like everybody acknowledged that President Clinton, had been inappropriate. But most people were like, "Yeah, but we're making a lot of money." The things were going really well in the country, despite what was going on in the White House, was more important than the inappropriate behavior, and that was kind of the lesson I took away.
And it does make a difference. There were, in fact, it was a Telegraph article I read where some people who had never voted Republican in their life, lived in New York, grew up in New York. Like one fella said, he was talking about why he voted for Mr. Trump, and he says, "Yeah, I don't like the guy." I'm not saying this; he's saying this, but he goes, "No, I've grown up in New York. I'm very familiar with he would say Donald Trump." He said, "I think he's an idiot. I think he's just going on and on." He says, "But I'm tired of things not working. That life was better, back then, and the other candidate didn't have any good ideas to make my life better." He said he looked at he had a baby girl with him, and he said that he's concerned for her quote unquote reproductive rights. He is concerned about that, but to put a few words in his mouth to try to characterize what he's saying, that's not the only factor in her whole life. What kind of world is she going to grow up in? Is it going to be a world of endless wars? Is it going to be a world, or she actually is going to be able to own a house one day? So yeah, those things do drive. Other people notice the immigration situation. It's not just immigration; it's illegal immigration. I really hope that there's a shift where we can start using the word illegal again, because there's legal immigration, there's illegal immigration. A lot of the analysts struggling with how is it? It seems like some voters voted against "quote unquote" their own benefits and their own priorities. And it's because they don't understand their priorities. They project their priorities and what's good for them onto them. So there's a lot of analysis going. Some ones say, "Oh, well, Miss Harris." I don't know if her husband has the same last name. I have to admit, probably goes by Ms. Harris, I assume. But anyway, regardless, I never thought about that. I don't know.
Well, I kept seeing the signs that said Harris Waltz, because that was the vice president, and I was like, "Is this a new dance? What is this? The Harris Waltz?" Okay. Dun-dun-dun.
Oh man, that was rough, Mr. Robinson. So anyway, they were saying about her. Oh, if only she'd had more time. If only Mr. Biden had stepped back. Well, let me say that's possible. On the other hand, the time she did have didn't go so well here and there. So I'm not sure that. But regardless, there's a few things I think do stand out. One, I have a quote from someone. He's a conservative commentator who, and I think a lot of these things are related, and biblically, I think it's important. Oh, let's get to the egg analogy. I mentioned I had this brilliant, but it's not actually brilliant egg analogy or metaphor or something. So MSNBC was reporting on this particular comments by this certain kinds of voters who might have voted for Mr. Trump, and they quote Ryan Girdusky, a particular conservative commentator, and pointed out how he told everyone the day of the election. I think it was the day of the election, but it's certainly because he says, "This is the day you get to throw a human Molotov cocktail, and his name is Donald Trump." Well, what is a Molotov cocktail? We might actually have listeners who don't know. Let's just say you saw a lot of them in the summer of 2020 here and there, including, I remember a couple of lawyers getting busted for throwing one. That's where you take like a bottle, like a big bottle filled with gasoline or something, and then you put a cloth through the top. So you set. I wanted to explain to everybody how to do one, but anyway, that's what you see. It's like you see it a lot of rabble rousing. You see it a lot of you said the word resistances. A lot of people in resistance because protesters will throw the bottle and the bottle breaks and you have the gasoline everywhere and the fire catches fire and everything. So you have that kind of stuff going on. He's saying this is your chance, just like these to throw one, but now it's a human being, and that destructive, burn it all down human being is Mr. Donald Trump. And they referred to voters like that as chaos voters, voters that are just. But I think they're just being dismissive, and I think that is a mistake. There was another interesting news item related, where Miss Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez She's a Democratic representative in New York. You've probably heard of her. She's often referred to by the initials AOC. Even I'm not saying that even disrespectfully. Even pro things say so. AOC. It's embraced. So AOC. She often goes by, and she came in with the squad. Some other very progressive-minded candidates at her time, who's frustrated with, say, the slow pace of Mr. Obama. The idea of taking ground slowly. They're trying to make radical changes. I was very anti Mr. Trump. Pictures of her at the border fences, not the border fences, but the detainment fences. Pictures of her crying, like, what are we doing with all these people? Very vocal, very, 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 very anti Mr. Trump. Well, that said, she won her own district handily, I think. But you look at the percentages, it's plain that some people who voted for her also voted for Mr. Trump. And whether you want to say it's due to political calculation, whether it's sincere on her part, I'm happy to assume that. And she is savvy with social media. That's one of her things she's got as a real strength. She's savvy with social media. She didn't understand, and she went to her followers, I think it was on Instagram, and asked them sincerely, look, some of you who voted for me, I say sincerely, at least they came across sincere, some of you voted for me and voted for Donald Trump. I'm not going to mock you. I'm not going to make fun of you. I'm not going to push back. I sincerely want to know why. Because you got to admit that seems contrary. That seems opposing. So she got a lot of feedback.
Apparently
and I think
she was bombarded.
Mr. Robinson, thank you. That was the Fox News title. If you see it in your search, it would just say AOC bombarded with comments. And it's like, so that's negative. But then Reed says, no, after asking followers why they support her, that was not negative. Let's say this, we would be excited if we were quote unquote bombarded, with comments that we asked for on whether it's, I learned over the feast you can't comment on Spotify. Apparently I didn't actually know that. Okay. So here's some of the feedback they gave her. One person said, this is off the Fox News article, I feel that you both are outsiders compared to the rest of DC and less establishment. Someone else said, you signified change. Trump signified change. I've said lately, Trump sounds more like you. Someone said, I feel like Trump and you are both real. There's that authenticity angle. Someone says, Trump is going to get us the money and lets men have a voice. You're brilliant and have amazing passion. Someone said it's real simple. Trump and you care for the working class. Now, it's interesting. They want to do opposite things for the working class. But my take on that is they realize, but at least you seem interested. Everyone else has all these other agendas and such. Someone said, you are focused on the real issues people care about, similar to Trump populism in some ways. Someone said, I voted for Trump and you. I'm not going to say other things they said because I'm trying to stay positive. Someone said, I know. Okay. I'm going to stop. I'm going to go ahead and pause there. Oh, actually, someone said I voted Trump, and so they didn't vote for her specifically. They voted for Mr. Trump, and then all the way down the Democrat line. So all Democrats except for presidency, and they said because he reached out to Muslims. Well, I think it's even interesting this person even noticed that, because so much of the tale is, he's a big racist. He just wants, if you're anything other than a white male, he wants to deport you. But some people pay attention and notice, well, no, he actually reached out to them.
I think President Trump got a greater percentage of the Hispanic and black vote this time than he did the first time.
100%. He absolutely did. Made gains that no Republican has made in ages. So I think what's interesting there is a few different things. One is a lot of people, it was a frustration vote.
Yeah, for sure.
They're so frustrated with the way things are that whether you're on one side or the other side, even if you have opposing views, if you're interested in changing what's going on, then man, you've got my vote.
Well, I mean, it was notable to me because I saw one. This is actually a tech person I follow, but he's quite vocal about some of these things, and he was, well, how could anybody vote for President Trump? Like, even as some of his old cabinet won't even endorse him, and that, sure, fair enough, but it's hard to really paint him as super fringy if you have like RFK Jr., who was a Democrat, come over and support him. Tulsi Gabbard, who used to be a Democrat, came over and supported him. Elon Musk even endorsed him. And so no matter what you want to think about Trump, there's some people out there that thought, hey, we're on a track that we think is a real problem, and Trump's at least a wild card enough to maybe move things in another direction. I think that's at least fair to say.
I think that is 100% fair to say. Whether they're going to end up being right or time will tell. But people are frustrated and they want some change, and that could be that's change on social levels. That's change in their pocketbook. The idea, people talk about the mandate, because when you get that many votes, that's enough. It's not even that universal, but that's enough these days for someone to declare.
Well, he won the presidency pretty handily, actually, and getting both houses. That's as mandatey as it gets.
Yeah, to have the Senate and the House of Representatives, it's a big deal. But then the question is, a mandate for what?
Yes.
And of course, they will claim it's everything we said we were going to do. I would say that the biggest mandate is kind of like what Mr. Obama ran on, which was change, hope and change.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the closest thing you could say is the most universal feel, is people want things to be different and they're tired of the way things have done. But that's an interesting rest. By the way, none of this fits my egg metaphor. I actually missed the opportunity. I wanted to say the egg metaphor when it comes to predicting things. And here's the point. So I'm still going to get out there and you can let me know if it's good or not.
Listen.
If God is cracking an egg,
because he's making an omelet?
That's the thing. Don't jump to conclusions about what he's making. Is it an omelet? Is it scrambled eggs?
Was it a bad egg?
Well, that's right. Or is it? Here, I'm going to reveal my cooking knowledge. Is it something that is made with eggs? I don't really know. But yeah, is it because he's going to add the ingredient and make a cake?
Yep.
Don't jump to conclusions, because God, let's just say, to me, I think in this election, God was definitely breaking some eggs. He is clearly doing something, but don't jump to conclusions.
As somebody that would until Christ returns, live as comfortably and peaceably as possible, I would like that.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
I'd love to have the freedom to do the work and have no hindrances.
So, one would hope that our new elected leader can bring some of that. I mean, we are told to pray that we can live peaceful lives, and that our leaders will do well for us. But I have a nagging suspicion that this is going to be much more apocalyptic than anybody realizes. That it's, I don't know. If I was going to make any kind of prediction at all, it's going to be it's going to be shocking what happens. I don't know what it is, but it's going to play out in a way that we're like, wow. Because what is it? God has prophesied a couple times when he would go through his prophets and say, I'm going to do something that's going to make everybody's ears itch.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if I'm
he talks about, hey, once again, I shake heaven and earth.
Yep, that's right.
We don't say amen here on the program. That's not our culture, but I'll throw an amen there, Mr. Robinson. So the passage I thought I'd wrap up with might be a little unusual, but it's the last thing that's an observation about the election, and it's also kind of a personal reflection. It is a blessing to have a God-given detachment from all of this. If you're out there getting caught up in it, and it's filling it's like, oh, you just can't help. You got to do a Facebook post about the election or about the candidates or this and that. So you are missing out on one of the great blessings that God gives us, which is the ability to focus on what's really important, and it's not this. It might be an odd passage to read. You mentioned Isaiah 8 earlier, and it makes me think of this particular passage. It's the one we mentioned in our one about conspiracies, like conspiratorial thinking or not conspiracy thinking or not thinking. But I'm not to say this to focus on conspiracies, but in Isaiah 8 and verse 11, starting there, the prophet says, "For the Eternal spoke thus to me with a strong hand and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people, saying, do not say a conspiracy concerning all of this people call a conspiracy, nor be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. The Lord of hosts, him you shall hallow. Let him be your fear. Let him be your dread. He will be as a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the house of Israel as a trap, to both the houses of Israel as a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem." So I'm not talking about conspiracies in this case. I'm talking about the odd peace there is with just fearing God and recognizing, hey, no matter what happens in this election, no matter what happens going forward, I'm not trying to say we're like one of my favorite gifts is people eating popcorn. Something's happening, so you got a guy sitting back and eating popcorn and watching things. I'm not saying exactly that, because the decisions that we made by our elected leaders are going to impact us and affect the work, and it should be a part of our prayers. But wow, I hope you would agree, Mr. Robinson, there is a comforting, peaceful detachment that we can have to be able to sit back and realize we don't have to be so invested in these things. Rather, we're invested that God is doing things in the world, and we're going to sit back and trust him to do what he's going to do.
You know what that actually reminded me of as soon as you started reading that, and because there's just so much drama going on around us in our nation. It's just drama. Like all the nations are watching it. It feels like it's almost like a reality TV show, which is kind of ironic since Mr. Trump ran one. But one of the most basic kind of metaphors of Christianity that Christ used and Peter unwittingly or unknowingly acted out, which was the raging storm around the fishing vessel. Christ walks across the water. Peter says, if that's you, Lord, command me to come out. And he comes out, and his first couple steps are going great. But there's a raging storm going on around him that distracts him. And once he took his eyes off Christ and got worried about the storm, of course, he starts to sink, and Christ reaches out for him. And then, the main takeaway from that is, don't fret about the drama and the storm going on around you. Keep your focus on Christ, and if we do, He will protect us and lead us to safety.